with the post hole, and we're interviewing Ben Elliott today. So first up, you're a graduate from the University of York, and you studied archaeology and specifically the Mesolithic. So what drew you to archaeology and why the Mesolithic?
What drew me to archaeology initially was looking through different options of degree courses to do. Thinking about maybe doing history, which is something I studied at school, which I quite enjoyed, but not really fancy being locked in a classroom for 3 years. So I kind of took archaeology as a slight gamble when I was kind of 18, just thought I'd give it a go because it sounded interesting. I really sort of fell in love with it when I got to York when I started my degree. And I became interested in Mesolithic archaeology during my first year when I started to realise that there was so much we didn't know about this period. It seemed like such an important period of time, and archaeologists had little understanding, and a lot of archaeologists had quite little interest in this period. So that's something that kind of captured my imagination really, and made me want to study it further.
Studying the Mesolithic, you've worked a lot with Star Carr. Is there any particular phenomenon at Star Carr that really fascinates you?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's lots of different patterns of behaviour at Starcar which I find personally fascinating. One of the things I'm thinking about a lot at the moment is I spent a lot of time studying the barbed points which have been made of antler at the site. And these seem to be made in a very, very set way. People have a very kind of specific way of making their barbed points at Starcar. But the actual finished artefacts come in a range of different sizes, different shapes, different styles. And they're actually quite diverse when you start to look at them. The way in which their barbs have been made, the way in which the barbs are spaced, the way in which the tangs are decorated is really diverse. And I find that fascinating in terms of what that means about the people who are making these artefacts, whether that represents a different intention to make different types of tool, or whether that's kind of an expression of individual identity and kind of personal flair in the way in which they're making those tools. So that's one aspect of the Starcar assemblage that I shall find personally quite fascinating.
So how much can you really tell from one group of artifacts about an entire culture?
That's a good question. I think from an archaeological perspective, particularly studying the Mesolithic, it's about trying to extract as much information as we possibly can. Often we don't get to choose the data sets that we have to work with in archaeology. In the Mesolithic, that's particularly the case. So whilst there might be limits as to what you could say realistically about a group of people living today by just purely studying one type of artefact, one group of artefacts that you find at a particular site, when we're dealing with early prehistory particularly, we've got to try and make the most of everything that we have and try and kind of extrapolate that possibly further than you would do if you were working with contemporary societies. So I think artefacts can tell us a hell of a lot about people, about the way in which they engage with materials, about their levels of skill, about the kinds of jobs that they were engaging in, activities they were engaging with, and the way in which they kind of thought about their world through the ways they made stuff. So I think there's a lot that these artefacts can tell us.
So you're also doing an archive project with postglacial, and the general aim seemed to be gain more information about the hunter-gatherers at Star Carr. So what do we know right now about hunter-gatherers, and what are we missing?
In terms of hunter-gatherers at Star Carr, we know a lot, and we're finding out more and more every day really as the kind of project progresses, as the postglacial project carries on with its excavations and its post-ex analysis. We're finding out all sorts of really interesting things about the way in which people live their lives at the site. I guess one of the big stories from the site at the moment, or has been in the last couple of years, is really recognising the way in which people at Starcar are investing in their landscape and their environment, and are really taking time and putting effort aside to make certain sites within that landscape a very particular way. So thinking about the scale of woodworking activities at the site, we're looking at large numbers of people potentially, carrying out large-scale woodworking projects and then depositing large amounts of that material. Think of the weight of how much that wood would weigh, bringing it to the lake edge and depositing it down there with those reeds. And also kind of similar scales of antler working. People making really kind of specific spaces just the way they want them within that landscape. Which tells us a little bit about mobility perhaps and how mobile people are. It certainly didn't look like people were investing that much effort at Starcar in creating this very specific kind of space. If they were just going to wander off and never come back to it. So I think that's one of the big kind of questions. But there are so many more questions outstanding in terms of how far people are moving, the size of those groups, the ways in which different societies and communities living in landscapes adjacent to Starcar would have influenced people who inhabited that particular site. So yeah, we're learning a lot, but there's certainly lots more we can learn.
In past research, one of the problems has been the scattered record, and you're putting together a new archive, trying to collate the scattered records. How are you going about that, and what issues have you come across?
Well, we're trying to tackle that particular problem from a number of angles. One of the projects I've been involved with, which was kind of fronted by Haley Soul and Nikki Milner, was aiming to go to museum collections and record or catalogue all the material that was recovered in the 1950s excavations. So bringing together an online resource, an online database, which is hosted by the ADS, where you can go and find out where specific pieces of material culture are housed today. That's not been available in the past. That's been a real big problem, is tracking down where all these excavated artefacts have ended up, being given to museums, then loaned over to other museums, and then returned or not returned, and museums being merged into larger organisations. Sometimes it's difficult, or it's easy to lose trail and lose track of where stuff is. So that's one side of that particular project. The other side is setting up a much more kind of responsible and intelligent archiving system for the current project and the current excavations. So thinking about, as we're digging, thinking about from the get-go, how we're going to archive that material, how we're going to make that accessible to researchers in the future, and how that data can integrate with the stuff that's been excavated previously from the site. So that's an ongoing project, and that's something that I've kind of been involved in setting up and also helping to implement as the project moves forward.
What do you anticipate the impact on research will be when you have this better organized archive?
Oh, I think it's going to make work at Starcar, or working with the Starcar material, a hell of a lot easier. I mean, I remember when I was doing my undergraduate dissertation, I went to look at PowerPoints, and actually finding where those materials were was a real struggle. But now having this kind of freely hosted online through the ADS, anyone can log in there and just and a click of a button locate exactly what it is they're looking for. That's going to make it's going to streamline research basically, and it's going to enable more people with less time to do more work with the material. You know, so people wanting to access stuff firsthand can do it very, very quickly. And that's going to help, I think, in terms of generating interest and also generating more research in the future.
Looking backwards a little bit, in 2013 you were involved with the Sonic Horizons Mesolithic project, and it was very successful. What do you think the allure of Star Carr is to non-archaeologists, and what is the benefit of having the public interested in these sorts of sites?
Well, I think in terms of Sonic Horizons, the allure of Star Carr to the public was the really rich sound world in which those people inhabited and lived in. So I think there's certainly scope, and there's a lot more work we can do as archaeologists to think about the sensory experience of sites, because that is something that can be communicated and which translates to people from all sorts of different backgrounds. You don't need a degree, a master's degree or a PhD in archaeology to really kind of pick up on how diverse people's experiences and sort of sensory perceptions were in the past when they're presented in this kind of way. So I think that people will always be interested in Star Carr because it's a fascinating site in terms of the material culture that it's generated. It's almost a freak, it's a one-off in terms of Britain and the kinds of questions we can ask, and you get those kind of fascinating insights into what was going on in people's lives 11,500 years ago. I think most people from different backgrounds in the UK today would say, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's cool." That kind of exceptional preservation of stuff which happened 11,500 years ago is always going to have a draw.
That sort of sensory experience, though, is a very unique approach. How would you encourage students to chase more creative approaches in their research?
I think talk to people. The Sonic Horizons of the Mesolithic came out of a collaboration between me and John Hughes, who's a PhD student in composition in the music department, and that came out of a relationship, a friendship, which was founded in another project that we were involved in previously. I've always had a real sort of strong interest in interdisciplinary collaboration, not just working between archaeology and perhaps the harder science, but also the humanities disciplines as well. And I've really enjoyed talking to people from different backgrounds about how they might approach Mesolithic archaeology and listening to what people have to say about what they think is interesting about archaeology, and using that as a starting point to getting stuck into further projects. So talk to people from different backgrounds, I guess, make friends with people in the music department and the arts groups and that kind of stuff, and just listen to people's takes on what it is you're doing.
Okay, just to wrap things up, we have two a little bit less hard questions.
Okay.
So if you could excavate any site in the world, where would it be and why?
If I could excavate any site in the world, it would be I've always quite fancied the archaeology of football stadiums. I think that'd be quite cool. Yeah, so I'll probably have to go to Stretford End and excavate Old Trafford to look at the kind of social history of Old Trafford. That'd be pretty cool.
Okay, and so if you and Indiana Jones took off on an adventure, what 3 items would you bring to survive?
Oh, to survive? Oh, I don't know. What would I bring to survive? Probably MP3 player, because Indiana Jones's taste in music's awful. I'd probably take a flint knife, just because it'd look cool, and then a bit of antler, because then that would be a conversation piece for me whenever we met anybody exciting on our travels, because I would have nothing else to say.
Okay, well thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure, thank you.